Hey everybody, welcome back to Record-ology. This is kind of a weird place for yours truly to be. Actually, I hike way more than you would imagine, but I thought this would be interesting to do a weird intro because we are doing a weird show about weird records. You're not going to want to miss this. Welcome to Record-ology. Now, let me preface this by saying there's always a weirder record. You've got liquid-filled records, you've got hologram records, etc., etc. But these are all records you're not going to see on a day-to-day basis. So I hazard to say that these are indeed very weird records and very interesting records. Of course, I want to know in the comments down below, what's your weirdest record? These are mine. Bone records are another weird one that will not be on this show, but the process is ongoing. This is just what I have so far. Bone records are really interesting, basically for Eastern Bloc countries back in the day where they couldn't get records, they made bootleg records using old X-ray films, which is fantastically odd, and you can buy them. A lot of this stuff, even though it may be weird, isn't really rare necessarily, so if you wanted to find some of these things, even bone records, they can be had. But in the case of bone records, be careful because there are bootlegs. And by the way, we will be looking at well over 10 records today. I was going to do top 10 plus honorable mentions, but there's just going to be a whole heck of a lot of records. And these are in no particular order. So these are 10 weird records. This would be considered one entry. This is a postcard record, and it literally is a mailable legal postcard on one side, and on the other side, it is a record. This was done recently by a company called Vinyl Post, and their records were very, very cool, and it was like a subscription thing, and they look like this. It's essentially like an embossed flexi disc adhered to a regular paper postcard. The sound was really poor, so what they started doing was including non-record postcards like these, and then a less exciting kind of plastic playable record. Now, the history of postcard records goes back decades. People could send songs, messages, audio. Again, we didn't have the internet to send audio clips, or, sometimes a postcard record was even a way to send a voicemail of sorts. But that's an interesting thing. Definitely not a high fidelity sound quality kind of a record, but an interesting footnote in the world of records. Next up, we have hip pocket records. This was a fad that was fairly short-lived in the 60s, where teenagers could buy records for cheaper, in fact 69 cents, cheaper than a regular single, and they would get some not so new, but pretty popular songs, and they were flexible. They're these little, not quite as small as like a 3-inch record. It's like about a 4-inch record. They were flexi discs, essentially. Not too bad a sound quality. As you can see there, it says Philco and Ford on there. They were the partners that went into this product early on. You'll see it's two-sided, so it's unique in that it is a two-sided flexi. Most flexi type discs aren't two-sided, so that's an interesting thing. And with it being flexible, you could put it in your hip pocket. So it's kind of got a double meaning. It's hip as in cool, and it's hip as in it would fit in your hip pocket. They are 45 RPM, and yeah, they released dozens of these things. They even had special record players that were designed to play this and regular records as well. And as you can see, you get 2 songs for single play phonograph only. Don't put this in your changer. Yeah, kind of a cool little thing. It also comes with a little cardboard insert just to protect the record. And again, I'm probably going to say this for everyone, but an interesting footnote in the history of records. All right, up next we have a test record. Now, what is a test record, you might be saying? Well, it's a record to help you test things. And this one is really interesting. This is a pretty high-end one, and you can use this to set up your audio system, to set up the very, very, very minute details of everything from your cartridge to your turntable to your entire listening experience. So there's test tones, there's locked loop sine waves. There's all kinds of crazy stuff on here. And that is interesting and rather unusual. However, what makes this really interesting is the actual pressing itself. As you can kind of see down there, and we'll look closer in a second here, this thing has some fantastic modulation pressed into it. So let's start from the outside edge and work our way inward. You'll have to look past the moire effect because these tight patterns on cameras can cause that. But I just think this is an interesting and odd record because of the way that the modulation is. I mean, you never see anything else that looks like this. Look at that. Now this one is interesting. This is a miniature 78. This is a 7-inch 78 RPM record. And you may be aware that for kids records, colored, yellow, red, etc., even like picture discs, you know, smaller, 6, and I guess sometimes 7-inch 78s weren't that odd. But for regular adult music, kind of odd to find it in this size. But a closer inspection reveals that this is not an adult record. This is indeed a kid's record. And what's odd about this to me too is the fact that it looks so unchildren-like, unfriendly to kids. It's just an adult-oriented design, so something that mom or dad would put on the phonograph for the kids. But while we're on the topic of children's 78s, here is one in my series of Walt Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Definitely geared towards children. Really cool. I love this. It's so cool to see kids' vintage records. And this is a regular 10-inch shellac record, by the way. And while we're on the topic of cool 78s, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the Vogue picture disc. This is the most common example, Sugar Blues. It's a two-sided, I think this is made out of a resin. It's not vinyl and it's not shellac. It's not even vinylite. It is a resin, and it's a beautiful example of a very early picture disc. But we're not here to look at just cool stuff. We're here to look at wacky and weird stuff. This is definitely weird. You are looking at a 5-sided 45 RPM record. How is that possible? It's only got 2 sides, right? Well, this side on the back that we're not looking at is a single side, like a regular record. But the one we're looking at right here, this side, actually has 4 tracks. That's because this is the Chariot race game, and there are 4 spiral grooves, and depending on where the needle drops, you could play one of 4 different tracks. This is an actual game, a very cool 49-cent game from back in the day. And depending on which chariot you wanted to win, you would pick your favorite based on color, if I remember correctly. And depending on which groove, and you can't tell by looking at it. I mean, if you look really carefully, you can see the different running grooves. They're roughly at quarter intervals around the disc. Depending on which one you got, your chariot may win or it may not. And the first half of the track, no matter which one you're on, sounds the same. So you only find out at the very end if you pick the winning one or not. This is a very weird record, but very, very cool. How about a record that wasn't ever pressed at all? This is a lathe cut record. This is a record that was a one-off custom lathe cut. So every record starts off as a lathe cut master disc. And from that, different pressing materials and the individual pressings themselves are made. However, if you're doing low batch or custom orders, there are still lathe cut records where you get the original lathe cut disc. And this is a one-off example from a label called Least of All on a beautiful clear disc. I love these Soundcraft records, essentially the CDR of the vinyl age. As you can tell, this is a custom recording of some Russian music. And if you ever wonder why a lot of these lathe cut records or custom records have more than one hole, they were essentially designed to just hold the record firmly on the lathe or the recording device. But this is cool, and you know, anything that's a one-off or custom or handmade, to me, is a super exciting and rare thing. And this is another record that, man, it looks cleaner on camera actually, so never mind. I was gonna say it needs some cleaning. It does. I don't know if you can see this. Why is this so dusty? Kind of in the same vein are these Record-ology and Voiceograph records. This is a super heavy metal, probably an acetate, I'm guessing. I'm not 100% sure. It doesn't really smell like an acetate, but it's got the safety coating around the outside edge so you don't slice yourself up on the metal. And this Voiceograph, these were records that you could step into a kiosk and record a message for a loved one. It's like the voicemail of the 1940s and early 50s. And this is simply paper stock. This is literally a paper record, kind of like a flexi disc, kind of like a serial record from decades later. But again, the fun is in what's on these things more so than even how cool they look. These are both, this is about a 6-inch record, that's about a 5-inch record. But what is on there? What is the message recorded? And if you're interested in that, by the way, look on our channel, because these records have appeared in other videos and we played them, etc., and you can kind of find out for yourself what these messages were. Usually the sound quality was pretty poor, but it wasn't about, you know, sound quality when it comes to these records. It's about history. It's about a snapshot. This recording is the only one in existence, and probably this one as well. It doesn't exist anywhere else. And when it's gone, it's gone. When it finally fades away, when the surface noise slowly takes over the sound, it'll be gone forever. Which reminds me, I probably ought to archive these. That's sort of a romantic aspect in my mind about vinyl records. My wife is rolling her eyes right now as we speak. I just know it. But to me, that the idea of that recording slowly wearing down with every play, and at some point the background noise, the hiss, the pop, the crackle, but the sound of the record slowly fading into obscurity. All right, moving on. How about a record that you were never supposed to own? And not only that, you were never supposed to even see this record. This is a radio transcription. Interesting one. It is a 10-inch vinyl. This is a 1960s era promo, a commercial for a Julie Andrews feature. And it's pressed on this sort of plum-colored, clear vinyl, which is really cool, something to behold. I just stumbled upon these, a couple years ago at an antique store for like $1 a piece. I bought a bunch of them. Different colors, different types. We've got a flipper commercial, and this is just super cool. You know, this is weird. It's interesting. It's cool. It's not typical. It's not something you're going to find in all likelihood tomorrow if you want record hunting. You know what I mean? I've really tried hard to stay away from a flexi disc because they're pretty common if you look for them, and they're not that weird. I think they're fascinating. But this one's cool for 2 reasons. Three reasons. One, it's cut. Usually flexi discs aren't cut round. I mean, sometimes they're. I'd say it's about 50-50 actually. Okay, so scratch that. 2 weird things. The first is that it's clear. I love a clear flexi disc. I just think it's cool. And the second is that this is 2-sided. That's pretty rare for a flexi disc. Or an Evatone sound sheet in this case. I love these things. They're cool. And no, they don't sound as good. The groove isn't as deep. But sometimes it's not about the sound. Like I just said a minute ago, sometimes it's all about the sound. And then sometimes it's all about the form factor, all about the item itself, all about the tangible, tactile element. And in the case of this, definitely. I love coming across these in the wild. An unlabeled mystery record, a true mystery record. This is a test pressing, and you don't know what it's going to be. Clearly there's 1, 2, 3, 4, looks like 4, maybe 4 tracks on this thing. Who knows what it is? Is it some rare test pressing? Is it something common? Is it local? Is it unique? The mystery of it. This is the true record archaeology for me. Coming across this in a thrift store for $1. I'm like, this is just going to be fun and exciting to find out what's on this record. Fascinating stuff. Do you guys have any test pressings? Music piracy was not necessarily a 2000s and 2010 thing because, my friends, this is a bootleg 78. That's right, Biltmore Records. This is a Glenn Miller record that is a bootleg issue. It's actually kind of cool, and from a collecting standpoint, I think it's definitely a worthwhile thing to have. This and many of these records are actually gifts from you guys if you feel so inclined to send records to be either just donated or to be reviewed. There's a P.O. box number in the description. Feel free to use it at your disposal, and we'll definitely give you a shout out if you are interested. But yeah, a 78 RPM shellac vintage bootleg. One-sided records are definitely odd. They're definitely weird. I love them. Here are a couple from my collection. I love this one because it's got the Columbia branding. Some of my favorites that I've seen, I don't have one that's like this, but actually have like the RCA Victor pressed in the opposite side with a pattern. This one is just blank on the other side, but super, super cool. One-sided records were actually fairly common in the early days of recorded music until somebody had the idea, you know what? There's unused space on the back of this thing. We can get 2 records on 1 disc. We should do that. And finally, an Edison diamond disc, Thomas Edison's ultimately failed attempt to compete with the disc market coming off of years of success in the cylindrical phonograph world. These were mega thick. How thick are they? They were very, very thick. Like 1/4 of an inch thick almost. And if the groove looks a little weird there, that's because these are vertically modulated, meaning it uses a hill and dale system. The groove isn't going left and right, back and forth. The groove is just going up and down, just like a cylinder phonograph. So from left to right, those grooves are completely smooth and completely unmodulated. So it doesn't have the same visual look. But again, ultimately it failed. Edison diamond discs weren't the only records to do that. There were others. I've got a couple. I have 4 or 5, maybe 5 or 6 of these Edison diamond discs, including a facsimile, which we did a show on that too. I keep saying that over and over, but we've done a show on it. And if you want to learn more, search Edison diamond disc on our channel and you will learn more. They're fascinating. They're very old records. These are like 1900 to like 1908 kind of records. So these are some of my oldest records. Not too expensive to find. I think I paid $4 or $5 for these. They're not too expensive. They're very interesting. You can't play them on a regular record player, otherwise the sound is very, very quiet. You need a special pickup or a special reproducer or a special needle to listen to this on, specifically a diamond needle. Some people say a sapphire ball stylus will work on a vintage phonograph, or you can sort of throw a regular like Chuo-Denshi cartridge out of phase and play them as well. There's some, room for discussion there, but a fascinating record. See a little bit of powder right here. These actually had a wood fiber core. Absolutely interesting. And this concludes my list of my weirdest records. Well, it started raining on us, so back in the car, time to make the long journey home. But this has been a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed this show. Again, let me know down in the description or down in the comments below rather, what your weirdest record is and what your weirdest record you've ever even seen is. I would love to see that. Well, my friends, that's going to do it for today. Happy record hunting. We'll see you next time.